Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our podcast series on global capability centres, where we explore the pivotal role that GCCs play in driving business success across borders all over the globe. I'm Chris Danks, and today we're honoured to have Arvind Chaturvedi back with us here again today. Arvind is the former Managing Director and Senior Vice President of a variety of organisations such as CDK Global, AstraZeneca, Capita, and many more. Arvind has successfully transformed businesses and built high-performing teams across India, the US, the UK, Mexico, and many other parts of the world. So welcome back again today, Arvind.
Thank you, Chris. Good to be back. Look forward to the chat.
Today, we're going to talk about something that's very close to my heart and relevant to my background over the last few years, which is around the employee value proposition and why it's so important to have an EVP when it comes to a global capability center in particular. We all know that it's a very important component to have within your business across the board when hiring. But just to kick us off on that, Arvin, why do you think an EVP is so important within a GCC? And maybe whilst you're talking through this, you can also explain for those that don't know what an employee value proposition is in your own words.
Yeah, so very simply, firstly, I think between the two of us, you are the real expert on this, Chris. I sit on the other side of the table on this one, quite frankly. But, being from the HR fraternity, I think you know this better than me, for sure. But, really for me, in a very simple sort of way, EVP is the USP, the unique selling proposition of an employer to its prospective employees or its current employees, quite frankly. It is about what you're bringing to them. It's what the employer is bringing to the employee. That's what the EVP actually, an EVP is about. And it is about the unique set of opportunities, benefits, the career progression, growth, all of that an employer typically is expected to take care of for an employee. That's what an EVP is about. But broadly speaking, it is the one reason why an employee might choose to join a particular employer or not, as the case might be, essentially. So it's that important, it's that vital. Going back to the question about why is it important for EVP, as you've already said, Chris, is important, period, irrespective of whether it's for a GCC or not. Because when an employee comes on board with an employer, they want to know that they'll be taken care of in every respect, whether it's in terms of compensation, benefits, financial emoluments, their career growth, their development, etc., etc. But that's not all that EVP is about. EVP, I think for me, the most important part of EVP is how well aligned it is with the values and the vision of the organization, essentially. It is about how the organization is likely to treat its employees, in doing what it does, essentially. And hence it is very, very important for every organization to have a very, very strong employee value proposition that they can put forth to all the employees, current and prospective, as I said earlier. Within a GCC, there are a few things that we need to look at. Firstly, GCCs usually are units that are remotely located from the hub, if you like. So the people who work in the GCCs usually are at a distance from where the action really happens day in and day out. And for them to remain connected with that action, with the thinking, with the philosophy, with the strategy, etc., of the parent organization, the EVP becomes that much more important. And yet there's this question that I've often been asked in my roles, and I'm sure you've been asked in your roles that you would have played as a professional, Chris, is how closely aligned or distinct, for that matter, can the EVP of a GCC be from the parent organization? And I think that answer has to be very clearly, that question has to be very clearly answered, because it's most important that on the one hand, the alignment is visibly there for the employees of the GCCs who are sitting in a remote location to feel close enough to the parent organization. And yet, it has to be fine-tuned to meet the expectations and the cultural nuances of the location where the GCC is located, essentially. So, that fine-tuning that you do as an organization also tells your GCC employees how valuable they are that you care for making that little change happen, those nuances to be addressed essentially. And that's a huge message to them, positive or negative. If you've done that and done that well, thumbs up, they will be with you, they will stay with you essentially. If you've not done that, then there's always a question in their minds as to whether, the location, the asset that the GCC is, and they as the employees of the GCC are of much significance to the organization or not, essentially. So I think there's a lot of things that employees read into an EVP. You and I both know that, Chris. But when some employees who are sitting in a remote location far away from where the action is, like I said earlier, it becomes that much more important because they want to know that they're important, and they want to feel connected and be part of and have that sense of belonging essentially. And that's what the EVP imparts. A strong EVP imparts, amongst other things.
It does. I appreciate the definition. Yeah. And I mean, first of all, I want to agree with everything you just said there, but I also would like to add to it because I think just taking a step back as well, if you look at the sort of evolution of EVP, employee value proposition, and how that's evolved, I remember 20 years ago, 15, 20 years ago, when really a job description was a bunch of requirements that you needed from a person to do a job. And that's completely shifted where over the last, several years, there's now an understanding that actually it's very much a two-way street. And as things develop, depending on the region, sure, the power may be more with the employer or the employee. That's true. That depending on the job role, the location, and these other factors. However, on the whole, it's kind of understood now that a balanced proposition explaining what the organization needs, both culturally, behaviorally, and skill-wise, as well as what focusing on what the employee needs and what they're in for if they join that organization is just a necessary thing to do when you're talking to the outside world, regardless of whether it's in a GCC or a senior role, a junior role, or anything in between, or in any location. So we've definitely seen a big shift around that, and I think that even in sort of job families where maybe there is an abundance of talent, it affects the overall brand perception of the organization. It affects the ability to hire the very top performers within a particular job family as well, even if there is an abundance of talent within that. And within the kind of more niche fields, it's the same in GCC. In fact, I can give an example from this last week where we were hiring for a Salesforce person in India, and we've now had two individuals have said no after accepting a job offer. Now, I'm not saying that our EVP was bad in this case, but I'm just trying to highlight the point that the competition for talent is so vast in that particular field.
People have options.
They have options.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that broadens into other cultural nuances about things. But at the end of the day, these people are being approached by multiple companies, and whoever they feel strongest about is who they're going to join. Obviously, things like the package comes into it, and things like that, of course. But the EVP is such an important component, and I just wanted to flag that example, as I say, not because the EVP was bad. I think it's quite the opposite, but it just highlights the competition for talent in certain areas across a business. And so therefore, getting this right is absolutely paramount to an organization. And I think in some cases, there are organizations that maybe don't spend enough time, actually, particularly in GCC locations, because as they see it, it's a low-cost region. It's got an abundance of talent. Maybe they're not so hot on the EVP as they would be for, a niche role in the headquartered location.
And that's a huge mistake because of all the things that you just said, Chris. These locations obviously have a lot of talent there to avail. No two ways about it. But there's a lot of competition as well, and the top talent is always in demand, and they will always have options. If you want the best of the best, then you got to really give them something that they can latch onto and say, this is why I want to come and join you and not anybody else, essentially. And you said something and towards the end of what you were saying, which resonates completely with me because I've had those conversations in the past in my own professional life with the relevant people, where people have said, oh, we got an EVP, we'll roll that out there itself and there as well, and everything will work out fine. We don't need to do any more work on it. And I said, stop. because of various reasons, including you're going from a very different environment where talent sees things very differently from to an environment where the talent is completely differently orientated. Does your EVP address that? You know, does it actually, is it sharp enough to attract talent with that kind of orientation, essentially? And these are mistakes that are easily made. So no, it's not any particular individual's fault when I say that somebody, that I've come across people who've just turned around and said, "Oh, we got an EVP, we'll roll that out over there." They're easily made because you sort of get blindsided completely in terms of what are the nuances of that location, that region, the expectations of people out there, the kind of competition that exists, and what are you trying to achieve out there? All of those things. So while EVP might be driven from the HR organization within an organization, essentially, the business input into that is hugely important, according to me. As to what the business is trying to achieve in that location, and then influence the EVP in accordance with that, quite frankly. And I think that little nuance that needs to be brought into it is what makes the difference between you finding the Salesforce people and they're joining you and they're not joining you, essentially. Yeah.
Do you know what, Arvind? I think that so when we talk to companies about this, we try and simplify it as much as we can to get that EVP created. So, for example, the first question that we will ask an organization is, have you thought about what it's like to work in your organization? Very straightforward question. Give a very honest, truthful answer that doesn't hype up the organization too much. What's in it for them? Because obviously your organization is not going to be for everyone, depending on the culture that you have within the organization, but it will be for others. So I think, a straight talking version of that is a good start. I think beyond that, you have to think about, what's in it for the employees, what's in it for the people that you're attracting. Now, the what's in it can be a variety of different motivations. So once you let them know what they're joining or what they would potentially be joining, it's then looking at, well, what are the components that would attract those people into the organization? What is whether that's to do with work-life balance, whether that's to do with, i.e. the culture of your organization to some extent, whether that's to do with the teams they're working with, the product they're working on, whether it's to do with other factors that may motivate those individuals that you need to join your team. So I think that those are the kind of headlines that you want to sort of target. Underneath that, it gets a little bit more complicated. So we recently have been talking a lot about the fact that leaders need to consider that they're now managing 5 generations of people at any one time, which is the first time in history that that's happened. And with 5 different ways of thinking as generational groups, and how do you kind of tackle that? How do you talk to different generations for different roles? That's a challenge in itself when it comes to the EVP. Then you cross-reference it against the cultural difference across from a location perspective, which we all know are vast depending on where you're going to. People have different motivations now than they did. I mean, we talk about India a lot, obviously, because that's where you have a lot of experience, but I remember talking on one of our other podcasts about how work-life balance is such an important component now within India, whereas maybe, and correct me if I'm wrong, but 15, 20 years ago, maybe that wasn't such a consideration.
I
So
remember
things have really
I
shifted.
said work was life is the phrase I used in that conversation that you're referring to, Chris. And that was true. 15, 20 years back, that's how it was, quite frankly. But you throw that at the Gen Zs and you're in trouble.
Right, right. Yeah, you're going to lose them on the EVP before you started, in some
Yeah,
senses. If
exactly.
if you talk to the wrong to those groups in a certain way, and I think that so the detail is very important here as well, and just getting that right on a job by job basis, team by team basis, but obviously starting with your holistic message as an organisation, I think is a very good starting point, and one in which not all organisations start with. Coming back to my original point, just starting really simple on the job description. Now, this is going to sound very, very basic, but it still amazes me how many organizations start with their job requirement
Yeah,
and don't start with what's in it for the individuals, what's in it for the people you're trying to attract.
exactly. I mean, there are a number of times when I've been asked the question as to how many times do we have to, communicate the EVP to the employees? And my simple answer to them is all the time. Starting from when they first came to you as a candidate. And that perhaps is the most important time. You have to tell them what the EVP is. They will evaluate their options on that basis. And if you don't get that right at that time, then you probably already lost the candidate, quite frankly, essentially. And I think exactly at your point. If you start a job description, with the what the task list is over there and skills requirements are, then you lost the candidate already, because they don't know anything about you. They don't know what to expect from you, and they don't know hence they don't know whether they want to work for you or not, essentially. So I think it's huge. One other thing that comes to mind, in addition to everything that you said, Chris, still hovering around why an EVP is important. I think the components have changed over time as well. You talked about work-life balance, for instance, in the context of India. But whether it's India or any other GCC location, quite frankly, the how meaningful is the work going to be, how impactful is the work going to be that I'm going to be doing, is a huge component now of an EVP anywhere in the world. Yeah, uh, and they don't want to be treated as secondary citizens. They don't want to be doing somebody's legwork. They want to be where it actually matters to the business. The new workforce is about that. They want to be right up there, delivering to the business, making sure that they're making a direct impact to the business outcomes, essentially. Now, is your operating model actually allowing that? That's a question that you got to ponder on. You got to think about that. Yeah.
And you touched as well on the fact that I think you said at the beginning of that sort of answer that you need to think about the employee value proposition throughout the journey, right? So start with the original, the first point of contact, what people are going to see and feel when they understand your EVP. But then as you move through that, it's how you communicate in the interview process, how the different touch points, the manager, the HR person, is it all consistent? Is the message consistent? And one of the things that we encourage and have seen done really well in certain organizations is 3, 4, 5 months into the role, asking the employee as part of their review, was the employee value proposition that you saw and felt throughout that journey consistent with what you're actually experiencing? And that will give you a lot of feedback into what you believe to be true versus what's actually true within both your organization and that office.
And you've hit the nail on the head, quite frankly. The authenticity of the EVP is what the employee is always looking at, quite frankly. Are the actions, are the practices in the organization aligned with what the EVP says? Because you can craft the most beautiful EVP, you know, and
Yeah.
deliver it through all your communication, all your channels to the employees. And then you go and do something else altogether, something different altogether, which is nowhere aligned with the EVP. You absolutely have disengaged your employees for sure, essentially. So I think that point you made about 4 or 5 months in, checking with them whether the EVP still resonates with everything that they see on the ground, essentially. Whether they see it being put in practice, is their experience aligned with it? I think it's so important. And not only then, I mean, I personally, as a leader, have done it myself, and I've always encouraged my leaders, who work for me, to do that as well. Every review, every engagement conversation, every time that you have the opportunity to speak with the employee, touch upon some aspect of the EP and see whether actually the employee is experiencing that or not. And it's a good way of measuring the effectiveness of your EVP as well, because, like I said, you can craft the most beautiful statement or set of statements, and yet not be able to influence your employee base positively if you're not careful, because the practice is not matching what it says. It's authenticity is questionable, essentially. And I think uh, at every touch point, if you keep checking in with your employees, with your team, whether the experience is aligned with uh, the statement, essentially. I think it's a good way of being able to adjust in good time before you've lost it all, essentially. So completely agree.
So let me ask you a question, Arvin. So with relation to the alignment of an EVP. So, do you think, I'm curious what your views are here, do you think that the EVP should be completely aligned to, should we say, the parent organization or the headquarters or the sort of global EVP of the organization? That's kind of the first part of the question. And the second part is, if there are components that need to be different, how do you kind of weave that together? When there's going to be different, there's still going to be different nuances in each region, different motivators in each region, each age group, each generational group, and so forth.
Yeah, I think I sort of started answering that question in the first response itself, but I think there is a need for the EVP to be tailored slightly for the region that it's and the people in the region that it's addressing essentially, and that includes the various generations that you talked about, Chris. Now you can't obviously write an EVP which addresses all the five generations on every aspect, right? You'll have to tune it to what's the most likely the most likely generation that's going to be maximum in your population. Essentially, that's how you'll tune it. But that aside, there how aligned it has got to be with the parent organization's EVP, the core value aspects, the vision aspects, the strategy aspects have to be 100% aligned. Otherwise, your employees in the GCC who are sitting remotely already will feel lost in terms of what they're trying to deliver to, right? So your business strategy should always define your talent strategy, and that should define your EVP as well, essentially, right? So there is a level of alignment that I believe should be very closely aligned with the parent organization, which is that central piece, which is the core values, the vision, the strategy, anything to do with things like DEI, etc. That all has to be completely aligned. No two ways about it. Yeah. And then there has to be a level of fine tuning that I was talking of earlier, which is to address the expectations of the workforce in the region that you're going in, essentially. Okay. So you already told the workforce that we are about this through the core values, vision, strategy, etc. Yeah. Now you're telling we also care for what you care about. Yeah. And hence we are doing this little fine tuning, which is, relevant to your region and your expectations, essentially. Yeah.
Yes.
And then it becomes a more comprehensive, EVP. So, what is the level of alignment it should have? In certain respects, very closely aligned, which is the core part about the business, and then very specialized for the region. That's how I would put it typically. Yeah. Is that how you think about it as well, Chris? Yeah.
So the way that I see things, I would largely agree with everything you said. I think the bit that sometimes uh, doesn't get enough focus is the tailoring of the EVP to the specific role. What we see is a lot of I mean, starting right at the beginning again with the description. It's not all about the job description, of course, but starting at the beginning, you see a lot of boilerplated. And even if the organisation has, really put an effort in with the EVP from an organisational standpoint, they'll take that and then start putting job requirements in there. Whereas I think there's a really key bit missing, which is actually asking the hiring manager to tailor the EVP or HR to do it alongside them for that specific job role, job family. And to mention as well the impact of this on a broader basis, I know that when GCCs are set up, quite often you'll be recruiting 10 or 20 or 30 of the same role. So it becomes even more important because you may have one job description for 20, 30, 40 vacancies. So it's even more important, I would argue, than the one-off roles in other locations from a business impact perspective. So I think the bit that sometimes gets overlooked is that. And I think, again, similarly, as you go through the process, talking about what it's like in that specific team, in that specific location, making sure that aligns to that person's specific values, and making sure that it's really understood. I still find it fascinating how organizations, have 5 or 10 core values, and if you ask 90% of the organization, they don't know what they are.
Yeah, I'm kidding with it. Exactly.
Yeah. So I think trying to make it real is some of the, and it's not a hard thing to do once you put your mind to it, and it can make all the difference.
Yeah, yeah. I think alignment of the personal values with the organizational values is so important for the employee to be engaged and feel motivated to do what they're supposed to do. Quite frankly, I mean, and not enough emphasis is laid on that, unfortunately, as you're saying, Chris. Yeah, yeah.
So, I mean, just coming back, there's a question I have around how this creates competitive advantage for GCCs. I think the obvious answer is that it does. I mean, we've talked about that already. But how would you quantify that? I mean, what kind of impact would it have? Let's say, coming back to the earlier point where we're looking for talent in some areas that may be in abundance in some of these regions, hence why organisations go to those locations. in reality and in practical terms, do you think it has a major impact on the types of people you attract, or is it maybe lesser of an impact than maybe some other locations that are more developed by way of talent?
No, I think it has a huge impact, quite frankly, because and more so now than ever. Yeah. There was a time when people in these locations were seeking these roles with these global organizations, etc. Now it has become the way of life for the new generation workforce, to be honest. You know, it comes to them rather than they having to go and find it. You see what I mean, Chris? Yeah. So now it's a job of the employer even more so to attract these people and retain them. The competitive advantage that comes by virtue of a strong EVP is essentially driven from your ability. We talked about, if you want to hire the best of the best, then you got to have a very strong EVP, a reason for them to come in, and that certainly puts you in a good place from a talent efficiency perspective, if you like, if you have the best of the best. If you're going for the second tier, third tier talent that's available, yeah, they are dime a dozen, quite frankly. You can go and hire them essentially at will, and they will come and join you, irrespective of EVP. But then, if you I talk of 5x people and 10x people who can actually create that 10 times value, 5 times value, etc., than a normal human being, essentially. They are the best of the best. And if you want to attract them, then you got to have a very strong employee value proposition. If you don't have that, then you won't get the best of the best, which means your talent efficiency goes down. Also, for the really difficult, things that you want to get delivered, difficult solutions that you need to get delivered, you might actually have to expend even more money and go and outsource it to expert organizations in that regard if you don't have that best of the best in your talent, essentially. Yeah. So it is hugely important to giving you that competitive advantage. Retention is the other big thing. We talked about attraction so far, but retention, EVP is a huge factor in that. And it goes back to the authenticity of the EVP, right? You and I talked about that a few minutes back, which is, does the practice match what it says on the tin, essentially, right? Does the organization actually, in its actions and its behavior, demonstrate what the EVP states? And if that alignment is not there, that authenticity isn't there, then chances are people will walk out. And when they walk out, you lose so much time in terms of what you're trying to get out to the market, or your service quality goes down if it's a service organization, essentially, because your trained and experienced people have left you, essentially, which means, again, you are leaving yourself exposed to the competition, who can walk in and walk over you, quite frankly, all over you. So it is retention becomes a huge. I think, generally speaking, the productivity is that you can get out of an employee is a direct factor of their motivation, and their motivation is driven by the EVP, essentially, to a great extent. Yeah. And the delivery of that EVP in action and practice, essentially. So you're trying to get a lot of good work done from your employees, but as an employee, you're not taking care of them. Chances are you will not get a lot of good work getting done from them, which means, again, you're losing to your competition, essentially. They might be better at it than you are, quite frankly. So your strong EVP and the delivery of that EVP, people don't make that association in the mind that an EVP actually, quite frankly, drives your business outcome to a great extent. They see EVP as a theoretical exercise on the side that HR does, okay, and has no impact on my business. And that's completely misplaced, that understanding, to be honest. It's so wrong, it's amazing. Yeah. Because EVP really defines the motivation of your employees, that defines the productivity that you'll get out of them, the outcomes that they'll be able to deliver, their mindset, their dedication to actually be with you and deliver those great outcomes that you as a business are trying to deliver, essentially, right? All of that is lost, quite frankly. Yeah. I can go on a bit, but, again, employer brand, you talked about it. You got a bunch of good people. Now you want more good people over time. And most good people come by word of mouth, not because of any other reason. They don't go to a job portal or job board and find their jobs there. They go somewhere because their friend who works there thinks that this is a fantastic place to be. Some real good work, real good practices, well taken care of, etc. So you're one of the things that I have done always, Chris, rightly or wrongly, and you as the HR professional can tell me whether my thought process was misplaced or not there. But I always used to challenge my recruitment team, my talent acquisition team, to pull down the hiring done using the agencies and get the referrals up, essentially. Because that was also my measure of how my employer branding is working or not, essentially. If I get more referrals, that means my employees are happy and they're willing to get their friends and family to the company as well, essentially. So implicitly, I was measuring two things there. One is obviously I was bringing down the cost of recruitment. Not great for the recruitment agencies out there, but that's what I was trying to do. That was my job, essentially, on one side. The other side, I was also keeping a check on my EVP being delivered, and hence my employees feeling engaged and motivated and happy to actually refer their friends and family, bring them in, essentially. And I think employer branding is such an important part of the job these days, because for every employer, because there are so many platforms out there, social media platforms where you can be slammed, like to the extent that you can't find a single employee on the back of it, quite frankly. Glassdoor, LinkedIn, you name it. Employees can go and write about you wherever they want to, and that's the end of you as an employer, quite frankly, in that market, essentially. So I think the that itself can make or break your business in a particular region if you're not careful. And that's driven by the delivery of a EVP, according to me. So competitive advantage, I mean, I just talked through some 4, 5, 6 things. I don't remember how many, but there are so many things that are directly impacted. The biggest thing for me is business. Please be aware, EVP is not a theoretical exercise done by HR. It has a direct impact on you. That's my message, if you like. Yeah.
Yeah, no, great. I want to pick out on a couple of the points that you raised there. So one of them is around, it's kind of linked to EVP. It's not directly about EVP itself, but it's very, very linked, which is then how you go on to measure the impact, measure the relevance and the fit of that employee into your organization. So we're kind of talking a little bit about how you assess them here, but it's very much linked to this. One of the things that we now have started to include as standard within our offering on the recruitment side is cultural assessment. So this is something that I know from experience people have mixed opinions on when it comes to psychometrics, when it comes to cultural assessments, when it comes to these kinds of things in general. I think maybe they have a little bit of a stigma attached to them in some way, that it's more like a horoscope than anything else. But that's not my opinion, not anymore. I think that the science has moved on a lot through AI and other technologies. And what we find is there are very straightforward ways that you can actually measure the cultural fit, or use tools as aids to figure out if somebody is a fit within your organization, aligned to your EVP, before you bring them on. And people often say, especially in some of the low cost locations, they'll say, well, the reality is that the cost and ease of replacing these people is easier than maybe it is in some places like, let's say, the US or UK or wherever it may be, Germany, for example. However, when you think about it, if you spend an hour as a hiring manager, let's say, working on your EVP, and you spend another hour getting the process right, maybe a couple hours, you've got 2 or 3 hours at the front end of the process. In my view, that's going to save you, 10 to 20 hours during the recruitment process, because you're going to attract the right people through the funnel into the interview and assessment stages. So it's going to save you a lot of time and effort there for sure by default. And then at the back end of that, most importantly, you're going to save weeks, if not months, in not to mention the huge costs associated with hiring the wrong talent, replacing that talent, the direct costs of recruiting, the costs of training, the slightly hard to measure costs around customer engagement, for example, if it's a customer facing role where this person is being brought up to speed, the cultural impact of people coming and going. There's all these sort of things that are slightly harder to measure, but we know are impactful, plus the cold hard cost of actually doing that, the time and the cost of doing it. So what we try and encourage people to do is, let's invest. These organizations are always very busy places, but invest 2 or 3 hours at the front end. That will pay you off at the back end, especially if you're hiring more than one person, teams of people. It's going to make a huge difference if you invest in the EVP but also in the assessment side of things. I think we're going to look at doing some separate content around assessments, actually, because it's something that I personally, my opinion, I don't think it's addressed enough. I think people still interview through gut feel. They believe they know what they need through, even through competency interviewing, skills-based interviewing, which is the current sort of trend almost. But it's more than that. Assessing the candidates properly is just, I think, something that's underdone. It's undercooked in most organisations. It doesn't mean putting them through, a 9-stage interview process that I know, like Google were advocating a few years ago. That's not what I'm getting at. That's obviously the extreme the other way. But implementing, a few extra steps that are very simple to do, that not only give you as the hiring manager or organisation comfort in who you're bringing into the team, but actually it also gives a great perception of the people coming in as well, because it shows that you're really caring about the fit within the organisation, and it sends them away with a good feeling about your organisation if you're bringing them in the right way. So I think there's a lot more that can be done. I think recruitment, if I'm honest, is stuck back in time a little bit when it comes to culturally, to adding, whether it's an external recruitment company or internal. I think the culture of recruiting generally is, we'll put them through an interview process, which is more or less the same in most organizations. So I think there's a lot more you can do there. One of the other things, as well as food for thought, around this topic is we have started to trial the ability to create short video interviews of candidates, and video job descriptions and overviews from hiring managers that are exchanged. So the job description is supported by a short video from the hiring manager or HR to kind of explain on camera what the opportunity is and what it looks like, the good, the bad, and the ugly, what they're walking into. And then vice versa, as the candidates move through the process, the manager and HR get a short video of the candidate to get an initial sense from them when they're getting a lot of applications, which is also a big time saver, because they can make some initial judgments at the very early stage to get the funnel down before having to go through a full formal interview process. So I know some of that is kind of on a related topic, not specifically EVP, but I wanted to just kind of get across how EVP sort of is the starting point that then filters into other best practice that rolls through the recruitment process.
For what it's worth, I'm a firm believer that cultural fit is extremely important. Exactly to your point, Chris. For all the good or bad reasons that you stated, essentially, the good reasons why you should have it there, and the bad things that could happen to you if you don't have it there, essentially. So and it's not about so much about what tools you deploy for assessments, etc. It's more about communicating that both ways. So this video interview, example, for instance, the new thing that's trying to incorporate in the process. I think it's a great way to ascertain, what the person's mental makeup is ahead of they coming live in front of you, essentially, quite frankly, and equally giving them the insight in terms of what they should expect or they could expect from the organization and the role that they're trying to get interviewed for, or they might actually take on. And that's going to be hugely beneficial to both sides, to be honest. So I completely concur. And taking going back to the standard process that people follow for recruitment, the HR interview that was a very important part of, or always has been a very important part of, all the recruitment, the interviews that are conducted for recruiting people. For me, it's always been, quite frankly, a gate that has to be gone through very objectively, as opposed to just being, something that needs to be done for the sake of being done, essentially. And one of the reasons is that the HR representative who's taking the interview, I expect them to be able to both deliver what the expectations of the organization from the employee is, and to the employee deliver what they should expect from the employer, i.e. the organization, essentially. And then on that, on the basis of that conversation, assess whether this is a good cultural fit or not for the employee within the organization, essentially. So for me, it's always been hugely important, and I think EVP plays a huge role in it. Not directly related, as you said, but certainly a derivative of that, for sure. Yeah.
One of the things I want to mention is maybe a little bit of a spoiler alert here, but in our organization, we are looking very closely at implementing an offering which is for a candidate value proposition as well. So one of the things that I have seen done in the recruitment industry, although not at a great scale, has been sitting under the umbrella of career development and career support for the candidate side, but also within that sort of theme, how to create the candidate value proposition. So dealing with individuals who want to figure out how to attract the right organizations in, the other way round, and how to present themselves to that, again, similar process through their resume, their CV at the beginning of the process. How do they stand out, particularly coming back to these roles where there are high job families? So let's let's say they're roles where you might get 10 candidates for every one role. How does an individual stand out in those cases? How do they really show an organization that they should be interviewed and move through the process? And there are many ways that can be done. I've heard many stories around this. I remember going back many years. This is shows how long I've been doing this, but going back into the early 2000s, there was an individual I'll never forget that we ended up hiring in our team, who, this was in the days where people were posting resumes, and so forth, sort of just about into the email era. But this individual actually sort of posted their resume and put it on like fluorescent pink paper, and put at the top, you might be wondering why I put this on fluorescent pink paper. It's just so you take the time to read it, something along those lines. And when we were actually looking through the 50, 100 resumes physically on a desk in those days, which one do you see? It's the obvious one, right? You see the pink one, and think. I mean, okay, that's an extreme example, but there are things that I think candidates can do more. The default is resume covering letter. I'll do what the company says. One of the things I always advise people is, look, you're going to be one of many. So yes, the organization might say, hey, reply here if you're interested, by all means, but you're going to get into an applicant tracking system, an ATS of hundreds potentially, and you might get missed. That's the reality. So how do you stand out? Well, contact the recruiter directly, find their email address, contact the hiring manager directly, find their email address. These things make a real difference when you're applying. So I think there's a probably for another podcast, I think, but there is a flip side to this, which is the candidate value proposition, and how we're looking at ways that how we can help the industry from that perspective as well as the employer's perspective.
That will be very high value. That will be very high value. That's especially in the current. We talk about abundance of talent, but there are only so many great jobs out there, which most of these people are looking for, quite frankly. And how do you stand out from the crowd? Essentially, I think that's huge. That's huge.
Yeah, and even for more niche positions, I think, sure, you might find a job. You might get 10 phone calls a day for if you've got the skill set that's currently in demand. But I would still say, focusing on the candidate, that your value proposition as an individual will increase your leverage when it comes to negotiation. When it comes to the position, there are other benefits that will come around this and give you more choice. Which let's face it, we all spend a lot of time working. So investing that time up front in your own journey as a candidate, even in a high skill demand area, has maybe slightly different benefits than other job families. So it's something that we're looking at the moment anyway. Arvind, I'm just conscious that we need to wrap up soon. Just before we sign off, I just would love to ask. I mean, I've given a couple of examples actually there about or particularly on the candidate side, about that candidate that submitted their resume on a very different coloured sheet of paper. Have you got any? Have you got any? This is the bit where we'll have organisations doing fluorescent pink job descriptions now and sending them out. But is there anything, any stories or any examples of where you've seen a company do EVP well?
Yeah, no, I think there are tons of examples. Again, I mean, lots of companies, and I've said wherever I have had the opportunity to impact that and influence that. Obviously, I've been very focused on that myself. But again, not focusing on what I have done through my career. If you look at the big names, a few names that stand out. IBM, for instance, the EVP revolves around innovation and using technology to solve complex problems. Now that's hugely attractive to the tech whiz kids over there essentially, and that allows them to build teams which are actually able to deliver, a lot of great innovation to the markets essentially. Accenture, they sort of pride themselves on being the leaders in helping organizations go through digital transformation. Now, for that, you know, um, they have to have an EVP which brings the right talent, which can deliver that across, right? And their EVP focuses on inclusion and growth and opportunities across the globe, etc. And that brings them the right talent and retains them as well. And they're able to then turn it around into, giving those innovative, solutions which will allow companies to do their digital transformation. So, two from the tech industry that I've just called out. I mean, you look across the base, and Siemens, again, focused on innovation, focused on, responsibility, social and business, and really being purpose driven. That's their EVP, quite frankly. And I'm not quoting any of the EVPs essentially very deliberately because I don't want to get caught out saying something wrong and somebody coming after me for that. But really, it is about making sure that people feel that they're doing good work, which is going to be both socially and business wise very impactful, and that's Siemens for you, and what they deliver out there in terms of technological advantage to their customers and the innovation that they bring to the table, frankly, is second to none. So that speaks for itself, the kind of workforce they can create behind it, essentially. And I'm talking of GCCs here. I'm not talking of the parent organizations, quite frankly. The GCCs being able to attract, essentially. Microsoft, General Electric, Capgemini, you name it. These companies have really mastered it, and hence they can, Microsoft, everybody knows the Microsoft story in that sense. They emphasize on personal development and positive impact through technology. Every kid who's coming out of an engineering institute in India wants to go and join Microsoft in the first place, essentially. Microsoft, Apple, or Google, And Microsoft, I mean, despite Apple and Google being as good as they are, Microsoft is still top of the list, quite frankly. People feel, these youngsters feel really great if they get a job with Microsoft. Why? Because the company promises them that growth, and it promises them the ability to actually, bring a real positive impact to the world, essentially. And it is the latter. It's the growth will happen elsewhere as well with Apple and Google and anywhere else as well. But the ability to actually create that impact is what excites them really, and brings them along. And what the result is: high performing teams delivering product innovation all the time. Quite frankly, I mean, Microsoft is a story that nobody has to tell anybody. If you've lived in this world for the last 40 years, you know what the story is. Simple as that. So you don't have to say much more than that. And I think that's real success being created on the back of what, frankly, is like to your point, Chris, from earlier, investment of very little time in the right manner, essentially, right, upfront, and that's some of the examples that you talked about.
Let me let's end on a very short story that I just want to mention, just for just for our listeners and our watchers here today. So I was going back about 4 or 5 years. We were supporting a few organizations across Eastern Europe, and there was one organization that had created a very strong EVP. And this is about the delivery of the EVP. So the EVP itself, I can't quite remember off the top of my head, but it was a very strong EVP. And what they found out was one of their biggest competitor organizations had a very large gym underneath their building that their workers went to. And that gym was owned by a different organization. So the competitor organization found out that that there was no contract in place with that gym for any marketing, advertising, and so forth. So they set up a contract in that gym, knowing that 80% of the gym members were working for the organization directly above, who were their target organization. And across all of the screens on all of the equipment, they basically placed all of their employer value proposition messaging with a very specific call to action that said something along the lines of, looking to advance your career, drop us a line. Here's a call to action. Come speak to us. We're just across the road. And I thought, okay, it's a little bit cheeky, but you know what? it did the job for them in a very competitive market. I thought it was brilliant. You've got all these employees in your, and it was literally across the road. It was maybe 500 meters away where the organisation was, and I think
Brilliant.
they put a little link to Google Maps on there or something as well, if I remember right. So it was obviously very perfect.
That's spotting an opportunity and making most of it, right? Quite
Yeah,
literally.
yeah, cheeky for sure, but you know what? It did the job and put a lot of smile on a lot of faces, and it worked. So anyway. On that note, I think we're pretty much out of time now. So just want to wrap up. So thanks again, Arvind, for joining us today on this podcast. Really appreciate your insights as always. And I would just like to add to those that are joining us either for the first time or as a reminder for those that have been on other podcasts with us. If you did enjoy the episode today, please do subscribe to this channel, leave a review, share it with your network. And also, I just want to mention that Arvind's LinkedIn profile is in the description if you'd like to connect and learn more about Arvind's journey or maybe get in touch with Arvind about anything on your agenda. I also want to mention that if you need any specific advice when it comes to international expansion, specifically around global capability centers, maybe you're looking to set up your first GCC, maybe you have GCCs, within your business already across different locations across the globe. Either way, we are experts here at the Leadership Collective on supporting organizations with that transition. So whether that's guidance and help and support and advice on where to set your GCC up, whether it's about setting up the office in that location right the way through to the infrastructure. And ultimately, what's been our experience for many years has been around the talent acquisition side, as you might have guessed from some of the talking points around this podcast. So if that's something on your agenda, please follow up with me directly, all the team here at the Leadership Collective, and love to have a conversation with you about that to see how we might be able to help point you in the right direction. So thanks again, Arvind, for joining us, and we'll see you all on the next episode.
Thank you, Chris. Great conversation, as always.